Okay, so here's the dealio. Chapter 28 is one of those chapters where we're doing just one day on it. Okay? And so the way you study for these is you try to listen to everything I say now. Maybe make a note of what charts in the book I talk about. Feel free to go back and watch the video so you can study again what I say. I'll put it on YouTube.
Mr. Willis, do you have a comment for the viewers at home?
Oh, it's downstairs.
Yay, way to view at home. Good for you.
Hard to hear, folks.
Okay. Hey, there's a flatworm.
Yep, that's what I do.
You ever seen one of those? There's how a frog develops. Okay, so what we're talking about now is the animals. Kingdom Animalia. Do y'all remember the other kingdoms in domain Eukarya? Protists, fungi, plants. Now we're on the animals. We already did these three. We're kind of flying through these kingdoms pretty quickly. We're going to talk about animals for a little bit. The animals are divided up in basically two categories. You got your invertebrates and your vertebrates. Invertebrates are animals without a backbone. Vertebrates have a backbone. Nina, what's your favorite animal? A zebra. That's a vertebrate. Maya, what's your favorite animal?
Koala.
Koala. That's a vertebrate. Nobody's favorite animals are almost ever invertebrate animals.
What's your favorite animal?
Octopus.
Nice.
Invertebrate. Not really. My favorite animal is a human. So how did animals come to be? Well, Kingdom Animalia evolved from protists. Remember the protists, the little single-celled flagellated protists? We looked at some of them under the microscope. Well, imagine a bunch of them collect together kind of in a ball. And over time, that ball becomes a little bit more complex, maybe like a big hollow ball of cells. A colony, we call that a colonial organism, kind of like Volvox. You remember the colonial Volvox? We had them in there. A colony of cells living together. And what ends up happening is over time, some of those cells kind of bulge inward and form an inner layer of cells. So you have cells on the outside and then cells on the inside. The cells on the outside become specialized, where they're good at protection. The cells on the inside might become specialized, where they're good at digesting food, or making, or specialized for reproduction. And that's what we still have today. We have cells on the outside that are good for protection, like your skin cells. We have cells on the inside that digest food and are for reproduction, your reproductive organs. Y'all see what I'm saying? This takes millions of years to evolve. Protists actually evolved into animals over about 600 or 700 million years. So we're talking a long time. But it eventually happens, and you go from simple single-celled organisms to complex multicellular organisms. And you can kind of see this complexity grow as evolution occurs throughout the animal kingdom. So if you look at this evolutionary tree, if you go from bottom to top, you're basically going in the order that these organisms evolved. The simplest animal is a sponge. It's just kind of a collection of a bunch of single cells into a big group, a big colony. And that's what a sponge is. Like SpongeBob SquarePants. He's just a cartoon character. He's actually pretty evolved. I mean, he can sing and stuff. And most of these organisms aren't going to be doing any dancing and singing. But sponges are the simplest. And then you have your Cnidarians. Have you ever seen a Cnidarian before? Like a jellyfish or a sea anemone or corals. Heard of them? And then there's these stenophores. You probably haven't ever noticed those. They're called comb jellies. And these lophophorans, we won't really talk about them. They look a little bit like jellyfish, maybe, or coral. Rotifers, we don't really talk about them. Flatworms, you've probably heard of. Have you ever heard of a tapeworm?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's also some flatworms that swim around in the oceans. We'll take a look at some of them. A mollusk. You've heard of mollusks before. Snails and conchs, whelks, and even octopus and squids, soft-bodied creatures. All the shells you see at the beach that are laying on the beach are all produced by mollusks. They're soft-bodied, and they usually make a shell to like protect them. And then there's your annelids, which are your earthworms and leeches, segmented worms. And then there's your roundworms that are like nematodes. I don't know if you've ever heard of them. There's a bunch of worms in the soil. And then your arthropods, it's probably the biggest group of animals of all. There's probably more arthropod species than all the rest of them combined. And we're talking there about all the insects, and scorpions, and ticks, and mites, and spiders, and centipedes, and millipedes, and then all your insects, butterflies, and ants, and roaches, and all those things. And then you got your shrimp and lobsters and crayfish, all the ones that are in the ocean too. They're land arthropods and they're ocean arthropods. So that is just a huge group. If there's any one of these that's the most successful, it's probably the arthropods. And then you got your echinoderms. Those are starfish and sea urchins and what are those? Sea cucumbers. And there's some other types called sea daisies. Anyway, all of that, from here all the way down, are all invertebrates, because they don't have a backbone. And so, that's your invertebrates. And up here in the chordates, that's your vertebrates. There's a couple of invertebrate chordates, but most of the chordates are vertebrates. We are part of the chordates. And that includes, not only are we vertebrates, mammals, but you're also talking about fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds. The ones y'all are saying are your favorite animals are usually chordates. But this chapter that we're on is all these.
Invertebrates.
Yeah, all these are invertebrates. And really, the most thing you need to understand about this chapter is how this table is arranged. What all these words mean. Protostome, radial symmetry, and segmentation, what that means, tissue layers. So that's what I'm kind of going to talk about this table here today.
So we should just know the thing.
Well, the table is good to know. But not everything on the table will be important. The first thing we want to talk about is symmetry. There's two types of symmetry here. There's radial symmetry and there's bilateral symmetry. The simple organisms down here, you see this branch, there's radial symmetry. We have these simple organisms, jellyfish and sea anemones, and these stenophores have what we call radial symmetry. Let me get back. Whoops. Not responding. Here we go. What is radial symmetry? Radial symmetry is when you can take the body and you can divide it in half. And you can do that a number of different ways. For instance, if you have a pizza in front of you, there's many ways to slice that pizza and get 2 equal halves, right? We call that a radial symmetry. It's like round. It's almost like it's round. Although that organism, that's a hydra, by the way. It's not really round. But there's a lot of ways you can cut it and get equal halves. A more advanced organism, there's only one way you can cut it and get equal halves. Right down the middle like that. We call it bilateral symmetry. We are bilaterally symmetric. You can cut me right there, and you get two equal halves. They're both massive halves, but they're equal. Now, whenever you have an organism that has bilateral symmetry, you're going to have some words that describe it. You got to know these words. Dorsal is on the back, ventral is on the front. Anterior is toward the head, posterior is toward the tail. The dorsal, you ever heard of the dorsal fin on a shark? It's on the back. Ventral's the stomach side. Posterior is usually toward the butt. Anterior toward the head. You got it?
So
It's pretty good balance, isn't it? Go ahead. What were you going to say? Now, another big dividing line is the protostomes and the deuterostomes. Go back to this picture here. See, protostome is one branch and deuterostome is another branch here. Most of the organisms that are invertebrates that we study are called protostomes. We are not. We are deuterostomes. But a lot of the organisms are protostomes. And let me show you the difference between the two. It has to do with the development of the animal. Now imagine early in an animal's development, sperm fertilizes the egg, and we got one single cell. At one time in your life, you were one cell in size. Do you remember? No, you don't. You're inside your mom's sexual organs. Let's move on. Anyway, you were one cell in size, and you started dividing. And then you were two cells. And those cells divided, you were four cells. And those cells divided, you were 8 cells. At one time, you were 8 cells old. All animals, when they're 8 cells old, you can tell at that point what they're going to turn out to be. Or you can tell in what direction they are evolving. Protostomes, at the 8-cell stage, they look like this. Deuterostomes, at the 8-cell stage, they look like this. Look at the deuterostomes from the side. 4 big cells on the bottom and 4 smaller cells on top. And the small cells are right above the bottom cells. See how they're right straight above? Whereas if it's a protostome, the cells are kind of turned sideways. Where they're not straight above, there's an angle between the bottom cell and the top cell. It's like the top cells are fit in the groove between the bottom cells at the 8-cell stage. Whereas deuterostomes, they're not in the groove, they're right straight on top. You see what I'm saying?
So how would you describe that?
Well, they give it a word. They call it the cleavage is radial. They call it radial when it's right up on top of one another, and they call it spiral when there's an angle. See, if you're looking down on the cells, these 4 cells are in the grooves here, and they call that a spiral arrangement versus a radial arrangement. So, which one are you? Well, you're a deuterostome. You're a deuterostome. Deuterostome means mouth second. And protostome means mouth first. Proto means first, stome means mouth. And what does that mean? It means you will form your mouth second. That means if we continue through and watch these cells multiply, and watch them multiply and grow, these cells will continue to multiply, and you'll eventually form this hollow ball, this organism that looks like a hollow ball of about 1,000 cells, and then a hole opens up in the ball. It's kind of like if you took a solid ball of cells and you pushed one end in, you'd end up with a hole forming where you push your finger through the ball, and a hole forms there, and that ends up forming the mouth. The hole ends up forming the mouth in a protostome, and the hole ends up forming an anus in the deuterostome. You all formed anus first. Your butthole was the first hole in your body, and later your mouth formed. So we're deuterostomes. Mouth second, butthole first. We all formed butthole first. Go ask your parents, see if they know this. Say, do you know which hole formed first, your mouth or your anus? They won't know. So that's a major difference between organisms. Let's go back to the chart. All of the organisms on this branch form form mouth first. And the organisms on this branch form anus first. They have the deuterostome development. They have the radial organization, whereas all of these down here have the spiral organization. That's a big division there in the animal world. So let's go back and look at our chart here. So, some ancient ancestor, some ancient protist, has it where all the cells start living together. That's multicellularity. Suddenly you go from a single cell living alone to many cells living together. And that's what a sponge really is. A sponge is just a bunch of cells living together. And then, at some point, the cells evolve into what we call tissue layers. Devin, are you not watching any of this? You should probably turn the desk in a way where you can see. It's helpful for learning. There you go. Almost. Keep coming. There you go. A little more. You're getting there. Keep going. A little more so you're looking right at it. There you go. Okay. So, this is just a group of cells, but this branch is cells with organization. Everything from here up is organized into what we call tissue layers. Layers of cells. You're actually made of layers of cells. You have three layers of cells. These ones down here have 2 layers of cells. Cnidarians and Ctenophores have 2 tissue layers, and they have radial symmetry. Everything on this branch here has 3 tissue layers and bilateral symmetry. Of the organisms with 3 tissue layers, you got your deuterostomes up here that form anus first with the radial organization of cells. And your protostomes down here that form mouth first with the, what was it called? Not the radial organization, the spiral organization of cells. All of these things.
So the only things that are radial symmetry are deuterostomes?
No, radial symmetry are the Ctenophores and Cnidarians.
I mean bilateral symmetry.
Bilateral symmetry are
Only deuterostomes?
no, both the everything on this branch. So both the deuterostomes and the protostomes are bilaterally symmetric. Yes.
So do all animals have like a form of symmetry?
Yes. All animals have a form of symmetry except sponges. Sponges, we say, are asymmetrical. So you can't cut them in half anywhere and get equal halves. They're just kind of growing all over the place. Just a bunch of cells. How are we doing on this chart? I don't care that you know any of the stuff of past protostome and deuterostome on this chart. But those main branches are important. Okay?
What about segmentation?
Segmentation is important, and we'll get to that. But as you can see, segmentation evolves several times. It evolves here, and it evolves here, and it evolves here. 3 times separately in the animal kingdom. So segmentation is a pretty important thing. So let's just go forward and talk about each of these organisms a little bit, just so you can kind of know what each of them is. Cam, you with me here? Are you focused on the screen?
Yep.
Okay. So, this is a sponge. And sponges basically live in the ocean, and there's some freshwater sponges, but most of them live in the ocean. And they suck water in through holes in their body. You see those holes there? They suck water in, and as the water comes in, it's filtered. It's filtered of organisms that are floating around in it. So the water comes in through these pores. It's filtered. Anything good that's floating around in the water is trapped, and anything bad or anything not used, like the water itself, just goes through and out. Oxygen is taken from the water and diffuses into the cells. And you can see the cells, some of the cells have flagella. And on lining the inside of the sponge, those little cells, they beat their little flagellas, and it creates the current that pulls the water in, you see. And lots of water will go through a sponge in a day. Many, many gallons. And so the water is filtered. That's the simplest organism of all. It's got no eyes, it's got no ears, no nervous system of any kind. Just a bunch of cells living together. And if you break a sponge apart, and some types of sponges, the cells will swim back together and reform the sponge. You ever seen that happen on SpongeBob? Mm-hmm. Do they break them up and he swims back together? Don't they do that in the show? Yeah. Question, Steele.
So does like hydrogen come out of it if it like takes the oxygen out or something?
No, I'm talking about oxygen that's dissolved in the water. So it's not breaking up the water molecule itself. But there's oxygen, O2, dissolved in the water that's removed, that the organisms can use. So, yes, it's a bunch of cells, not only those cells on the inside, but there's cells that look like little amoebas crawling around. There's cells that form the outer layer. If you want to learn more about each one of these types, you take marine biology, and we study each of these in a lot of detail. Here is a jellyfish, right there. That is what we call a cone jelly. It's actually got rows of cells that have cilia, and the cilia kind of beat back and forth like this, and they cruise around the ocean. And here's some sea anemones, some coral, a big jellyfish, a Portuguese man-o-war. You ever heard of that? It's got all this. That one right there can kill you. But these are all basically types of Cnidarians. We call them Cnidarians. You with me, Cam? Cnidarians that they all have special cells called stinging cells that can shoot out little barbs out of their tentacles and stick into a fish or an organism. How many here have been stung by a jellyfish? Yeah? So, all of these organisms can sting to some extent. Now, not all of them can hurt people. Some of them, the stingers aren't strong enough to penetrate your skin. But most sea anemones and corals, jellyfish, they can hurt you.
This one.
Yes?
What makes the Portuguese man-o-war so much more dangerous than a regular jellyfish?
I guess the poison is stronger. I'm not sure. That's a good question. I'm not sure. It's actually a colony of these Cnidarians that hang down. These are each many hundreds of individuals attached to one another, hanging down from that central float. And sometimes that thing hangs real long and it can get wrapped around you or something like that and really sting you bad. But I don't know. It must have stronger poison. This is a coral skeleton. And I'll pass it around, but each little hole right there, you getting this? Cam? You pointing at me? Each little hole right here holds a little coral that has, and it's real tiny. You can, when I pass this around, look at it. Every little circle here is a coral. And what the corals do is they create a kind of a hard shell for themselves. and they're living inside these little containers. So that hard material that corals live inside is called calcium carbonate. And they'll create whole reefs, coral reefs, millions of those organisms all living together. Becky, you passing that around? I'm sorry. You want to call you back in? Okay, please.
Is that your sister?
It's a handler. There's so many of them, it's hard to keep track. This is a flatworm, and there's lots of different types of flatworms out there. Some of them are free living, and some of them are parasites. Some types of flatworms are like tapeworms. You've heard of them? This is a free living flatworm. A flatworm is the simplest animal that evolved a nervous system. And you can see this thing actually has eyes that take in information. And it has this shows its nerves going down its side. It actually has a brain. Jellyfish, and sea anemones, and corals, and sponges, they don't have brains. So we see the evolution of more complicated systems as we go up through evolution here. This is also the first creature with a complicated excretory system. And when we discuss all the body's systems, we'll take a look at its excretory system again. This is a parasitic flatworm. And here's another you're probably more familiar with, a parasitic flatworm called a tapeworm. Let me just show you real quickly the tapeworm lifestyle. This might interest you. If you eat uncooked meat infected with tapeworms, you'll swallow it, and the tapeworm will embed in your intestine. That's your intestine. And that's what the baby worm looks like. It embeds in your intestine and grows into something that looks like this. It's got a head with hooks and suckers, and it embeds in your intestine, and it grows real long body. And what will happen is the body of the tapeworm will grow to real long, and the tapeworm will actually mate in your intestine with other tapeworms that you happen to have swallowed. And they have little tapeworm sex that goes on in your intestines. And they reproduce like crazy. Millions of eggs a day will be injected out of the tapeworm into your gut and will come out in your poop, in your feces. That's the scientific word for poop. Did you know that, feces?
Does it harm you?
Doesn't really harm you unless they grow to such huge amounts and extents that it's what they'll do is they eat your food. The food that you eat, a lot of it goes to them. And you'll suffer from malnourishment. You'll actually lose weight when you're infected with a tapeworm because you aren't getting enough nourishment in your body. It's all going out your butt in tapeworm eggs. And you could, if you want to see if someone's infected with tapeworm, you just look at the stool. You can take a stool sample. The doctor looks at it and sees if there's a bunch of eggs in there. Yes?
Don't people actually voluntarily ingest tapeworms in order to lose weight?
Tapeworm diet, yeah. I wouldn't recommend it. Yeah. These tapeworms can grow up to 30 feet long inside your gut. And if you start having real bad problems, you have to get them surgically removed. Sometimes they'll just come out of your butt and it looks like a long string, like a shoelace.
They also use antibiotics, right? To kill
them. To try and kill them. Yeah, sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. Anyway, what happens is the eggs, if you crap into a toilet, they'll get flushed down the toilet and they'll get treated in the sewage treatment plant and nothing will happen to them. But in some places, especially kids or like in other countries, people just crap in the toilet and you flush it and the poop just goes straight to the river. And so, or if you could go on the ground. Now, people usually don't go on the ground, but animals, dogs and stuff, go to the bathroom right there on the ground. Here's a pig rooting around in the feces because That's what pigs do, but you've probably seen your dog eat crap before, or you can understand animals that go out there, root around in the doo-doo, and eat some of it, and those eggs get inside the body of this pig and form a cyst in the meat of the pig. If you eat the pig meat, then it can continue the cycle.
My dog
If you
can
cook the pig meat, you won't have any problems. That's why you shouldn't eat undercooked pork. Have you ever heard about that? Don't eat undercooked pork. They'll give warnings about undercooked meats because it can pass the worm cycles if you keep going.
My dog has tapeworm.
Yeah.
I saw it. It scared me.
So,
It's so gross.
your dog ate some meat that was undercooked.
I think he ate like
Some animal, a squirrel or something.
I know,
You
I don't
probably
think
caught an
it's-
egg.
No. My dog's really fluffy.
Yeah. Well, he must have eaten some.
He ate like probably some like dirt or like some like animal feces that had.
Had the eggs in it?
Had it.
Well, usually that just forms cysts, not full adult tapeworm.
I don't know what
In the
happened, but
body.
I had. Scooped out one.
Does the size of the tapeworm depend on the size of the animal, or?
Yeah, or the species of the tapeworm. Yeah. Question?
So in humans, it becomes like the full-grown worm, but in like animals like pigs, it just goes into the
A
muscles.
cyst in their muscle. Now, it could become, if the animal ate meat and was like the human, then it would become a full-grown worm in that animal.
But if it just ate the eggs, then
If it ate the eggs, then it forms cysts in the animal's muscles. So it just depends on at which stage you're acting as which host. We call this the primary host is the human, and the secondary host is the pig in this particular life cycle. But a human could be a secondary host. If you eat doo-doo that's infected with eggs, you'll become a secondary host, not a primary host. And you could get tapeworm cysts in your muscles. So it just
So if you
depends
like-
on where in the cycle you consume.
If you cut out your tapeworm cyst, would there be worms in it? Or just
It's
eggs?
just a baby worm that's just waiting to be eaten by another organism. And it's a cyst is what it's called. It's kind of a larvae that just sits there for your whole life. Did you have a question over there?
yeah.
No? Let's move on. You can study tapeworms. I took a class called Human Parasitology in college. And we studied all types of worms that people get. It was a disgusting class. So what you're looking at here is an invertebrate, a snail. Did you know snails have little tongues called radulas?
Mm-hmm.
It's like a tongue with teeth on it. And they kind of lick and scrape things. They scrape algae off the thing. They're good to put in your aquarium. They'll scrape the algae off the thing. Anyway, so a mollusk is a soft-bodied creature. It has a soft body with a bunch of different types of organs. It's got a nervous system, reproductive system, digestive system. It's got all sorts of different systems that we'll study later. There's different kinds. Most of them will secrete a shell. Most of them have a layer called a mantle that secretes a hard shell that will protect the body of the organism. You don't have to know all these parts, but we'll learn parts later when we do body systems. But they come in different types. Some of them don't have a shell, like a squid or an octopus. Some of them do have a shell, like this Nautilus here. Or like this tongue shell here, which is basically like it's like a swimming snail that has a colorful shell there that it can get in. And some of these swim around in the ocean, and some of them just sit there like a clam and dig to the bottom of the ocean and stick up a couple of siphons and filter feed. Take the water in and spit the water out. Now, this is these are showing two earthworms that are mating with one another. This is an earthworm, which is a segmented worm, which develops segmentation. Now, segmentation is when a body section just repeats over and over and over again. And it makes the worm grow really long because it's got basically the same body section over and over again about 100 times. It makes it a real long body. We have segmentation too. Look at the way our body repeats over and over and over again. We just copied the same basic idea and made our bodies longer. It's a common thing seen in the animal system, segmentation. Copying something over and over. And we see that in the segmented worm. Earthworms are segmented worms. Leeches are segmented worms. You've heard of leeches before, right? They suck blood.
Ooh.
Now these are little roundworms called nematodes. Sometimes they're microscopic, and sometimes they're macroscopic, like this lungworm. And these are pretty common things, but you don't see them a lot. Most of them are microscopic. This guy has a roundworm disease, a cyst. A worm is living in his body that blocks up his system of his body that moves water around his body. It's his lymphatic system.
Is that his leg?
That's his leg. And it's filled up with the cells are engorged with water. All the cells are swelled up with water because a worm is blocking the vessels in his body that remove water from his leg. You have vessels that circulate water around your body called lymphatic vessels. And a roundworm got in one of his vessels and blocked it, and the water couldn't leave his leg. So the water gets absorbed by the cells, and the leg grows huge. It's called elephantiasis. Have you ever heard of that? Mm-hmm. Elephantiasis.
He seems pretty.
Medicinal bleach.
That sucks blood from under your skin.
Why would you want one?
They used to do it in all.
Well, you can cut it and suction the blood out. You've probably seen them do that in the hospital. They stick a tube in there and suction blood from a bruise. If you don't want to cut your body, you just stick a leech on there and it'll suck it out. A bunch of places do that don't have hospital equipment.
He seems pretty chill about this.
Yeah, seriously.
About getting the leech, or about having the
Yeah, he doesn't seem too concerned about it.
having the problem there.
Yeah.
He probably could be. It should be. It can kill you to have elephantiasis like that.
That's where the elephant man came from, right?
Yeah. Well, no, he had a different thing.
Oh, okay.
He had a neurological disorder, tumors in his nervous system, causes his face to be inflamed. Finally, we're about to run out of time, but you have these arthropods, and the things the arthropods developed that nothing else had evolved were called they're called compound jointed appendages. So you can see all the arms and legs of these things are jointed. I'm going to finish this. I didn't quite finish this. I'll finish it at the beginning of next time. Okay? But if you can kind of review a little bit of the stuff I said here, maybe watch it on video, fill this out, you can go home. I'll try and finish invertebrates the next time. I didn't quite get it.
Any message that you want to leave with the viewers at home, Mr. Willis?
No message, except just try and hit them straight and study hard.
All right.